The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Miller's coffee house as Sarah Martinez pushed open the heavy glass door. The familiar smell of fresh coffee beans and warm pastries greeted her like an old friend. She had been coming to this same coffee shop for 3 years now, always at the same time, always ordering the same drink, and always sitting in the same corner booth. Sarah was 28 years old with dark brown hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her brown eyes held a sadness that most people never noticed because they were too busy staring at other things. She wore a long-sleeved navy blue sweater despite the warm September morning, and dark jeans that covered her completely from neck to toe. Only her hands were visible, and even those showed the telltale signs of what she tried so hard to hide from the world. The scars on her hands were impossible to completely cover. They started at her wrists and traveled up past where her sleeves ended, disappearing under the fabric like a roadmap of pain that only she could fully read. The skin was a patchwork of different textures and colors, some areas smooth and shiny, others raised and rough to the touch. Most people who saw them looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the obvious signs of trauma. Sarah approached the counter where Maria, the friendly barista who had learned her order by heart, was already preparing her usual drink. A large coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, nothing fancy or complicated. Maria always smiled warmly at Sarah and never stared at her scars the way other people did. This small kindness meant more to Sarah than Maria could ever know. "Good morning, Sarah," Maria said cheerfully as she handed over the steaming cup. "How was work last night?" Sarah worked as a night shift nurse at Mercy General Hospital, a job that suited her preference for working when fewer people were around. The hospital corridors were quieter at night, and the dim lighting made her feel less exposed. She was excellent at her job with a gentle touch and an understanding of pain that came from personal experience. Her patients trusted her because they could see in her eyes that she truly understood what it meant to suffer. "It was busy," Sarah replied quietly, counting out exact change from her wallet. 3 car accident victims came in around midnight. "We worked on them until dawn," Maria nodded sympathetically. She had learned over the years that Sarah preferred brief conversations and never pushed for more details than Sarah was willing to share. This respect for boundaries was another reason why Sarah chose this particular coffee shop over the dozens of others in town. Sarah walked carefully to her favorite corner booth, the one that sat in the back of the shop where she could see everyone who came and went, but where most people would not notice her, unless they were specifically looking. The booth had high backs that provided some privacy, and the morning light from the nearby window was soft rather than harsh. She settled into her usual spot and pulled out a paperback novel from her purse. Reading had become her escape, a way to lose herself in other people's stories so she did not have to think about her own. Today she was reading a mystery novel about a detective who solved crimes in a small coastal town. The characters were fictional, but their problems seemed so much simpler than real life. As Sarah opened her book and took her first sip of coffee, she noticed 3 college students sitting at a table about 10 feet away from her booth. They looked like they were probably around 20 years old, with the carefree appearance of people who had never faced serious hardship. 2 girls and 1 boy, all dressed in expensive clothes and carrying the latest model phones. The blonde girl wore a pink sweater that probably cost more than Sarah made in a week, and her nails were perfectly manicured in a bright red color. The brunette had on designer jeans and a white top, with jewelry that sparkled every time she moved her hands while talking. The boy wore a polo shirt and looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine advertisement. At first, Sarah paid no attention to their conversation. College students came into Miller's coffee house all the time, usually talking loudly about parties, classes, or their weekend plans. But after a few minutes, she began to notice that they were speaking more quietly than usual, and their eyes kept glancing in her direction. Sarah tried to focus on her book, but she could feel their stares like physical weight pressing down on her. This was a feeling she knew well, the uncomfortable sensation of being observed and judged by strangers who knew nothing about her story. She shifted in her seat and pulled her sleeves down further, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. The 3 students were whispering now, their heads close together as they looked toward Sarah's corner booth. She could not hear their exact words, but their body language told her everything she needed to know. They were talking about her, specifically about the scars they could see on her hands and the small portion visible at her neckline, where her sweater had shifted slightly. Sarah's heart began to beat faster, and she felt the familiar flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. She considered leaving, gathering her things, and walking out before whatever was about to happen actually happened. But something inside her resisted the urge to run. She had paid for her coffee, and she had every right to sit in this public place just like anyone else. The blonde girl was becoming bolder now, no longer bothering to whisper as quietly as before. Sarah could catch fragments of their conversation, words like gross and what happened and scary looking floating across the space between their tables. Each word hit her like a small knife, cutting into the careful emotional armor she had built around herself. Sarah closed her book and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, using the warmth to steady herself. She had faced this kind of cruelty before, but it never became easier to endure. Every time it happened, she was reminded of how different she looked, how her appearance made other people uncomfortable, and how the sacrifices she had made were invisible to those who judged her based only on what they could see. The three students were laughing now, no longer making any effort to hide their discussion about the scarred woman in the corner booth. The blonde girl named Ashley was the first to speak loud enough for Sarah to hear clearly. She had been the ringleader of the whispered comments for the past 10 minutes, and now her voice carried across the coffee shop with cruel confidence. "I honestly don't understand why people like that come out in public," Ashley said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I mean, look at her hands. It's honestly disgusting. If I looked like that, I would just stay home forever." Her friend Jessica, the brunette with the designer clothes, nodded in agreement while sipping her fancy latte. "Right? Like what even happened to her? It looks like she was in a fire or something. Maybe she should wear gloves or something to cover it up." The boy with them, whose name was Tyler, seemed less comfortable with the conversation but did not speak up to stop it. Instead, he just looked down at his phone, occasionally glancing up at Sarah and then quickly looking away again. His silence was just as painful as the girl's words because it meant he was choosing not to defend her. Sarah felt her face growing hot with embarrassment and anger. The coffee cup in her hands was warm, but her whole body felt cold despite the long sleeves in the heated coffee shop. She had been through this kind of situation before, many times over the past few years, but it never got easier. Each cruel comment felt like a fresh wound on top of old scars that had never fully healed. The words these young people were saying brought back memories that Sarah tried hard to keep buried. She remembered the first time she had looked in a mirror after the accident, the shock and horror of seeing her changed appearance. She remembered the long months in the hospital, the painful skin grafts, the physical therapy, and the slow realization that her life would never be the same. But what hurt even more than the physical pain had been the way people looked at her afterward. The stares, the whispers, the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room. Some people tried to be kind, but could not hide their discomfort. Others, like these college students, made no effort to hide their disgust. Ashley was warming up to her cruel performance now, encouraged by her friends' laughter and the attention she was getting. I wonder if she was born that way or if something happened to her. Either way, it's really inconsiderate to make other people look at that while they're trying to eat. Sarah's hands began to tremble slightly as she gripped her coffee cup tighter. The ceramic was smooth against her scarred palms, a sharp contrast to the rough texture of her damaged skin. She tried to focus on her breathing, a technique she had learned in therapy to help manage moments like this. The therapist had told her that other people's reactions were about their own fears and limitations, not about her worth as a person. But knowing this intellectually did not make the emotional pain any less real. When someone looked at her with disgust or made cruel comments, it still felt like a judgment on her entire existence. Jessica was giggling now, emboldened by her friend's boldness. Maybe she works at one of those haunted houses for Halloween. She wouldn't even need makeup. The two girls burst into laughter at this comment, the sound echoing through the coffee shop like the cawing of cruel birds. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she fought them back with fierce determination. She had learned long ago that crying in public only made situations like this worse. People either saw tears as weakness or as manipulation, and either reaction made her feel even more exposed and vulnerable. She thought about her usual coping strategies. She could get up and leave, walking quickly to her car before the situation escalated further. This was what she usually did, and it was probably the smart thing to do now. But something deep inside her was rebelling against the idea of running away again. The scars these students were mocking told a story that they could never imagine. Each mark on her skin represented a moment of courage, a choice to put others before herself, a willingness to face danger so that other people could live. But there was no way to explain this to strangers without revealing details about her past that she was not ready to share. Sarah had been a different person before the accident, more confident and outgoing. She had loved her job and felt proud of the work she did. The physical changes to her appearance had been devastating, but the emotional changes had been even worse. The confident social person she used to be had disappeared along with her unmarked skin. Ashley was not finished with her performance yet. She was clearly enjoying the attention and the power she felt in being able to mock someone who could not, or would not fight back. I just think it's selfish, you know? Like we're all trying to have a nice morning and then we have to see that. It ruins the whole atmosphere. Tyler finally looked up from his phone, and for a moment Sarah thought he might say something to stop his friends. But instead he just shrugged and went back to scrolling through his social media, his silence serving as approval for the girl's continued cruelty. The other customers in the coffee shop were beginning to notice the loud conversation. Some people were glancing over with curiosity, others with obvious discomfort. A few looked like they wanted to say something but did not know how to intervene. The morning atmosphere that had been peaceful and comfortable was now tense and awkward. Maria, the barista behind the counter, was also watching the situation with growing concern. She had always been kind to Sarah and clearly cared about her regular customers' well-being. But as an employee, she was probably unsure about how to handle a situation like this without making it worse. Sarah closed her book completely and placed it flat on the table. Her decision was made. She would not run away this time, no matter how much easier it might be. She had spent too many years hiding from people like this, letting their ignorance and cruelty drive her into isolation. Today felt different somehow, like a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. The cruel laughter continued from the nearby table, each sound cutting deeper into Sarah's heart, but also strengthening her resolve to stand her ground. Sarah Martinez had been at Fort Leonard Wood for exactly 6 weeks when the unexpected summons arrived. She was cleaning her rifle after another perfect day at the shooting range when Sergeant Morrison approached her bunk with an expression she had never seen before. Instead of his usual stern look, he seemed almost nervous as he handed her a folded piece of paper with official military letterhead. The message was brief, but confusing. Private Martinez was ordered to report to Building 447 at 800 hours the following morning to meet with Colonel James Richards from Special Operations Command. Sarah had no idea what Special Operations Command was or why such a high-ranking officer would want to meet with a basic trainee who had not even finished boot camp yet. That night, Sarah
lay in her narrow bunk listening to the snores and
whispers of 40 other female recruits trying to sleep in the crowded barracks. She stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had done wrong. Maybe her shooting performance had raised suspicions about her background. Perhaps the military thought she had lied about her experience or training. The more she thought about it, the more worried she became. Her bunkmate Jennifer was a cheerful girl from Ohio who had become Sarah's closest friend during their weeks of training. Jennifer noticed that Sarah was unusually quiet and asked what was bothering her. When Sarah showed her the official summons, Jennifer's eyes grew wide with curiosity and excitement. She had heard rumors about special operations, but like most recruits knew very little about what they actually did. Building 447 was located in a restricted area of the base that regular trainees never visited. Sarah had to show her identification to 3 different guards before she was allowed through the final checkpoint. The building itself looked ordinary from the outside, but the security measures suggested that important and secretive work happened. Inside these walls, Colonel Richards' office was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a hallway lined with photographs of military operations from around the world. Sarah recognized scenes from Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places she had only seen on television news reports. The images showed soldiers in combat gear working in desert mountains and jungle environments that looked nothing like the peaceful farmland of Kansas. When Sarah knocked on the office door, a deep voice told her to enter. Colonel Richards was a tall man in his early 50s with gray hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. His uniform was perfectly pressed and covered with ribbons and medals that told the story of a long and distinguished military career. Behind his desk hung flags from various units and a large map of the world with red pins marking locations that Sarah could only guess. About the colonel gestured for Sarah to sit in a chair across from his massive wooden desk. For several long moments, he simply studied her without speaking. Sarah had learned during boot camp to sit perfectly still and maintain eye contact with superior officers, no matter how uncomfortable the situation became. Her ability to remain calm under pressure served her well during this intimidating first meeting. Finally, Colonel Richards spoke in a voice that was both authoritative and surprisingly gentle. He explained that reports about her shooting abilities had reached the highest levels of military command. Her drill sergeants had submitted detailed accounts of her performance at the rifle range, including measurements and photographs that documented her incredible accuracy. Even experienced military marksmen were having difficulty believing what they were seeing. The colonel opened a thick folder that contained Sarah's complete military file. He had studied her background extensively and was impressed by more than just her shooting skills. Her psychological evaluations showed remarkable emotional stability and the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. Her physical fitness scores were good despite her small size and her classroom. Performance indicated above-average intelligence and strong, problem-solving abilities. Colonel Richards explained that the military had special units designed to handle the most difficult and dangerous missions around the world. These elite groups required soldiers with very specific combinations of skills that could not be taught in regular training programs. Physical strength and weapons expertise were important, but mental toughness, patience, and the ability to work alone were even more valuable qualities. Sarah listened carefully as the colonel described sniper operations in general terms without revealing classified information. He explained that snipers worked in small teams or sometimes completely alone in hostile territory. They might spend days or weeks in hidden positions gathering intelligence and waiting for specific targets. The work required incredible patience, precise shooting skills, and the mental strength to handle extreme isolation and stress. Most sniper candidates were experienced soldiers who had served for several years in regular combat units. The training program was extremely difficult and most applicants failed to complete it successfully. However, sometimes the military identified individuals with natural abilities that suggested they might succeed, despite their lack of experience. Sarah's combination of shooting talent, calm personality, and high test scores had caught the attention of people who specialized in finding these rare candidates. Colonel Richards was careful to explain that he was not ordering Sarah to apply for sniper training. The decision had to be completely voluntary, because the program would be the most challenging experience of her entire life. Many strong, experienced soldiers quit during the first week when they realized how demanding the training would be. The physical requirements were brutal, the mental pressure was overwhelming, and the academic portions required mastering complex subjects like advanced mathematics, weather analysis, and battlefield psychology. Sarah asked several questions about what sniper training would involve and how long it would take. The colonel answered honestly about the difficulties she would face while emphasizing that her natural abilities gave her a better chance of success than most candidates. He also explained that completing sniper training would open doors to career opportunities that most soldiers never had the chance to experience. As Sarah considered this unexpected opportunity, she thought about her quiet life back in Millbrook, Kansas. She remembered the countless hours spent in the whispering woods with her grandfather Eddie, learning to move silently through the forest and take precise shots at incredible distances. Those childhood experiences had been preparing her for something she never could have imagined. The colonel gave Sarah 24 hours to make her decision. She could continue with regular basic training and probably have a successful military career in a traditional role, or she could take a chance on something that would push her abilities to their absolute limits while serving her country in ways that few people ever could. That evening, Sarah walked alone around the base thinking about her grandfather. As stories from the Korean War, Eddie had never talked much about the specific things he did during combat, but she remembered his emphasis on the importance of precision, patience, and protecting fellow soldiers. She realized that her unusual talents might be exactly what the military needed, and that this opportunity was probably what Eddie had been preparing her for during all those years of hunting and target practice in the Kansas countryside. When Sarah reported back to Colonel Richards' office the next morning, she was ready to give him her answer. The quiet girl from the small farming town had decided it was time to discover exactly how far her natural abilities could take her in service to something much bigger than herself. The United States Army Sniper School was located deep in the mountains of northern Georgia, where the terrain was so rough that even experienced hikers got lost regularly. Sarah Martinez arrived at the training facility on a cold October morning, with 23 other candidates who had been selected from military units around the world. The remote location was chosen specifically because it provided the most challenging environment possible for testing soldiers who wanted to become military snipers. Sarah was the only woman in the group and by far the youngest candidate. Most of the men were seasoned soldiers with years of combat experience in Iraq, Afghanistan, or other war zones. They looked at Sarah with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism, wondering how someone so small and inexperienced had earned the right to attempt the most difficult training program in the entire military staff. Sergeant Martinez was the lead instructor, and he made it clear from the first day that he did not care about anyone's background or previous accomplishments. Every candidate would be treated exactly the same and judged only on their performance during the next 8 weeks. He explained that historically, only about 30% of students successfully completed the program, and those who failed would be sent back to their regular units with no shame attached to their effort. The training facility consisted of several simple buildings surrounded by thousands of acres of wilderness that included dense forests, steep mountains, rushing rivers, and swampland that seemed designed to make human movement as difficult as possible. The weather was unpredictable, with temperatures that could drop 30 degrees in a single afternoon and rain that turned dirt trails into rivers of mud. The first week was designed to eliminate candidates who were not physically and mentally prepared for what lay ahead. Every day began at 4:30 in the morning with a 10-mile run, carrying 60-pound packs through terrain that would challenge experienced mountain climbers. The pace was brutal, and several strong-looking soldiers dropped out before the first week ended, claiming injuries or simply admitting they were not tough enough for this level of training. Sarah struggled with the physical demands more than most of the male candidates. Her small frame was not built for carrying heavy loads over long distances, and she often finished exercises minutes behind the fastest students. But her years of hunting with her grandfather had taught her to endure discomfort without complaining, and she never gave up no matter how exhausted she became. The academic portion of sniper training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during regular military education. Students had to master advanced mathematics, including ballistics calculations that accounted for wind speed, air density, temperature changes, and even the rotation of the Earth. They studied weather patterns that could affect bullet trajectory over distances of more than half a mile. Map reading exercises required identifying targets and planning approach routes through hostile territory. Sarah discovered that her patient personality and good memory gave her advantages in classroom subjects that some of the more physically gifted candidates lacked. While muscular soldiers struggled with complex mathematical formulas, Sarah quickly understood the relationships between environmental factors and shooting accuracy. Her ability to remain calm under pressure helped during time tests that caused other students to make careless mistakes. The most challenging aspect of sniper school was learning to move through hostile territory without being detected. Students practiced camouflage techniques that required them to become virtually invisible, even to instructors who knew exactly where to look for them. They learned to crawl for miles through thick brush, moving so slowly that progress was measured in yards per hour rather than normal walking speed. Sarah's small size became a significant advantage during stealth training exercises. While larger candidates struggled to hide their bulk behind small rocks or thin tree trunks, Sarah could disappear completely in vegetation that barely concealed a backpack. Her natural ability to remain motionless for hours without getting bored or restless impressed even the most experienced instructors who had been teaching these skills for decades. Week 3 brought the first major elimination exercise that would determine which candidates could continue with advanced training. Each student was dropped off alone in the wilderness with minimal equipment and assigned to reach specific checkpoints while avoiding instructor patrols that were actively hunting for them. The exercise lasted 72 hours, during which candidates had to navigate rough terrain in complete darkness while carrying all their own food and water. Sarah was assigned a route that crossed 2 mountain ridges and included fording a river that was running high due to recent rainfall. She had to reach 4 separate checkpoints spread over 15 miles of wilderness, while staying hidden from instructors who used night vision equipment and motion sensors to detect student movement. Failure to reach any checkpoint within the time limit would result in immediate dismissal from the program. First night was the most difficult as Sarah learned to move through dense forest in complete darkness without using any light that might reveal her position. She fell into a creek within the first hour, soaking her boots and equipment, but continued moving toward her first objective. Her childhood experience tracking animals through the whispering woods helped her understand how to read terrain by touch and move silently even when she could not see obstacles ahead of her. By dawn, Sarah had reached her second checkpoint ahead of schedule despite the challenging conditions. She spent the day hidden in a thicket of thorny bushes, watching instructor patrols search areas she had passed through hours earlier. Her ability to remain completely still while insects crawled over her face and arms impressed observers who were monitoring student progress from concealed positions. The third day brought the most demanding test as Sarah approached her final checkpoint, which was located on a ridge overlooking the main training facility. The area was heavily patrolled, and students were expected to spend hours observing target buildings through their rifle scopes while remaining undetected by roving instructors. Sarah found a position among fallen logs and spent 6 hours gathering intelligence while 3 different patrol teams passed within yards of her hiding spot. When the exercise ended, Sarah was one of only 14 candidates who successfully completed all requirements. 9 students had been eliminated for various failures, including missing checkpoints being detected by instructor patrols, or simply quitting when the physical and mental demands became overwhelming. The group that remained would continue with advanced shooting, exercises that would test their marksmanship skills under the most challenging conditions possible. Staff Sergeant Martinez gathered the surviving candidates for a brief ceremony. Acknowledging their accomplishment, he explained that completing the stealth exercise meant they had demonstrated the basic mental and physical toughness required for sniper operations. However, the most difficult challenges still lay ahead as they began learning to make precision shots at distances that most soldiers considered impossible. Sarah looked around at her remaining classmates and realized that she had earned their respect through performance rather than words. The men who had initially questioned her presence now treated her as an equal, who had proven herself capable of meeting the same standards they were held to. She thought about her grandfather Eddie and wished he could know that his patient teaching in the Kansas woods had prepared her for challenges he never could have imagined. The quiet girl from Millbrook had survived the first phase of the most demanding military training in the world, but the hardest tests were still ahead of her.
Sarah Martinez watched through her rifle scope as the American convoy slowly approached the kill zone, where enemy fighters waited in hidden positions. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but her hands remained perfectly steady on her customized M24 sniper rifle. Sergeant Thompson lay beside her, using his spotting scope to calculate wind speed, distance, and atmospheric conditions that would affect the trajectory of her bullets over the next few critical minutes. The convoy consisted of 5 heavily armored vehicles carrying supplies and 23 American soldiers who had no idea they were driving into a carefully planned ambush. The lead vehicle was a mine-resistant truck designed to survive roadside bomb attacks. Behind it followed 2 supply trucks loaded with food, ammunition, and medical equipment, desperately needed by forward operating bases throughout the region. Thompson whispered urgent information about the enemy positions he had identified through his high-powered optics. The primary threat was a heavy machine gun team positioned behind a low stone wall, approximately 800 yards away. 2 additional fighters with assault rifles were hiding in a bombed-out building 600 yards from the road. A third group had positioned themselves in rocks on the opposite side of the valley, where they could attack the convoy from multiple directions simultaneously. The range to the machine gun position was 1,247 yards, which was nearly 3/4 of a mile. At that distance, Sarah would have to account for bullet drop, wind drift, air temperature, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth itself. The slightest miscalculation would cause her bullet to miss by several feet, potentially alerting the enemy fighters and allowing them to complete their attack on the vulnerable convoy below. Thompson worked quickly with his calculator and range-finding equipment to determine the precise adjustments needed for such an extremely long shot. The wind was gusting from the west at approximately 12 miles per hour, but the speed varied unpredictably as air currents moved through the mountain valleys. The temperature had risen to 94 degrees, which would affect the density of the air through which the bullet must travel. Sarah made the necessary adjustments to her rifle scope while controlling her breathing and focusing her mind on the target. She had practiced shots at similar distances during training, but never under combat conditions where the stress and consequences were real. Through her scope, she could see the enemy machine gunner clearly as he prepared his weapon for the attack. That would begin as soon as the convoy entered his effective range. The lead vehicle was now less than 2 minutes away from the ambush site. Sarah knew that once the shooting started, the armored trucks would have difficulty maneuvering on the narrow mountain road, and their crews would be exposed to enemy fire from multiple directions. The success or failure of the ambush would likely depend on whether she could eliminate the heavy machine gun before it could inflict serious damage on the American vehicles. Thompson gave Sarah the final firing solution, including all the mathematical calculations needed to compensate for the extreme distance and environmental factors. She made small adjustments to her scope settings and positioned herself for the most stable shooting position possible. The rocky ground was uncomfortable but provided a solid platform that would not shift when she fired her rifle. Sarah focused on her breathing technique and waited for the perfect moment between heartbeats when her body was completely still. The enemy machine gunner was clearly visible through her scope as he made final preparations for the attack. She could see other fighters moving into position, but the heavy machine gun represented the greatest threat to the convoy and had to be eliminated first. At exactly 10:32 in the morning, Sarah squeezed her trigger gently and felt the familiar recoil of her rifle. The bullet left the barrel at a velocity of over 2,700 feet per second and began its journey across the valley toward the target. For nearly 2 full seconds, the bullet traveled through the air while Sarah maintained her position and watched through her scope. The bullet struck the enemy machine gunner in the center of his chest, and he collapsed instantly behind the stone wall. The heavy machine gun fell silent before it could fire a single shot at the approaching convoy. Sarah immediately shifted her aim toward the second group of fighters, while Thompson called in the successful hit over their radio communications system. The elimination of the machine gun team disrupted the entire enemy ambush plan, but several fighters remained in position and began firing at the convoy with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. Sarah quickly engaged the riflemen in the bombed building with 2 precise shots that eliminated both targets at a range of 600 yards. The remaining enemy fighters realized their ambush had failed and began retreating toward predetermined escape routes. Sarah continued, engaging fleeing targets as they moved between cover positions trying to escape into the mountains. Her 4th shot hit a fighter carrying a rocket-propelled grenade launcher at a distance of over 900 yards. Her 5th shot eliminated another enemy who was trying to set up a mortar position that could have threatened the convoy even after it passed. Through the immediate danger area, within 8 minutes of her first shot, Sarah had eliminated 7 enemy fighters and completely disrupted an ambush that could have resulted in numerous American casualties. The convoy continued safely through the valley and reached its destination without losing a single vehicle or crew member. The enemy attack had been prevented entirely through precise long-range shooting that demonstrated the value of well-trained sniper teams. Thompson was amazed by what he had witnessed and immediately began documenting the details of Sarah's shooting performance for his official report. Several of her shots had been made at distances that challenged the capabilities of even the most experienced military snipers. Her accuracy under combat stress was remarkable, and her quick transition between multiple targets had prevented the enemy from regrouping or continuing their attack. The convoy commander radioed his gratitude to Sarah and Thompson for saving his soldiers from what could have been a devastating ambush. Intelligence officers later determined that the enemy fighters had been planning the attack for several weeks and had chosen the location specifically because it provided excellent positions for destroying American vehicles on the narrow mountain road. Word of Sarah's exceptional performance spread quickly through the military communication network. Combat footage from helmet cameras and vehicle-mounted systems provided clear documentation of the engagement that was reviewed by commanders at multiple levels. Military analysts calculated the precise distances of her shots and confirmed that several were among the longest successful sniper engagements in recent military history. Sarah felt a mixture of relief, pride, and sadness as she realized she had killed 7 human beings in less than 10 minutes. Her training had prepared her for the technical aspects of long-range shooting, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional impact of taking lives, even when those lives belonged to enemy fighters who intended to kill American soldiers. Thompson reassured Sarah that she had performed exactly as trained and had saved the lives of 23 fellow soldiers who would have been vulnerable to the planned ambush. Her actions represented the highest ideals of military service, where individuals risk their own safety to protect others who depend on their skills and courage. The quiet girl from Millbrook, Kansas, had proven herself capable of making impossible shots under the most demanding combat conditions. Her natural abilities combined with intensive training had created a military asset that few armies in the world could match. But Sarah's reputation was just beginning to grow, and soon her extraordinary skills would come to the attention of the highest levels of military command. General Robert Morrison was a legend in the United States Army, with 32 years of distinguished service that included combat tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several classified operations around the world. He had commanded everything from small special forces units to entire divisions and had earned every major military decoration, including the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism during the Second Gulf War. When General Morrison visited forward operating bases, the entire command structure prepared for weeks in advance because his reputation for excellence was matched only by his intolerance for anything less than perfect performance. The 4-star general arrived at forward operating base Shank on a hot April morning 6 months after Sarah Martinez had prevented the convoy ambush that made her famous throughout the military intelligence network. His visit was part of a broader inspection tour designed to evaluate combat readiness and morale among troops serving in the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan, where enemy activity had been increasing steadily over the past year. General Morrison's advance team had provided detailed schedules and requirements for his visit, but nobody at the forward operating base expected him to ask specifically about meeting the sniper who had been making impossible shots in recent combat operations. Stories about Sarah's abilities had reached the highest levels of military command through official reports that documented shooting performances many experienced officers found difficult to believe without seeing video evidence. Sarah was cleaning her rifle in the armory when Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found her and explained that General Morrison wanted to meet with her personally. She had never been in the presence of such a high-ranking officer and felt nervous about representing her unit and the sniper program during what would certainly be an important conversation. Her previous meeting with Colonel Richards seemed simple compared to facing a 4-star general whose decisions affected thousands of soldiers around the world. The meeting was scheduled to take place at the base shooting range, where General Morrison could observe Sarah's abilities firsthand rather than relying on written reports that might have been exaggerated by enthusiastic commanders. Sarah arrived at the range wearing her best uniform and carrying her customized M24 rifle, along with the spotting equipment normally used by Sergeant Thompson, who was unavailable due to a minor injury sustained during a patrol mission 2 days earlier. General Morrison was exactly what Sarah expected from such a senior military leader. He was tall and imposing with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. His uniform was perfectly pressed and covered with ribbons representing decades of distinguished service in multiple combat zones. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected the lives of thousands of people. The general began their conversation by reviewing Sarah's military record, which showed exceptional performance in every category from basic training through advanced sniper school. He was particularly impressed by her psychological evaluations that indicated unusual emotional stability and decision-making abilities under extreme stress. Her combat reports documented shooting achievements that challenged the capabilities of even the most experienced military marksman. However, General Morrison had learned during his long career that written reports could sometimes exaggerate actual performance, especially when young soldiers were involved in dramatic combat situations that created opportunities for embellishment. He had seen many promising soldiers who performed well in training but struggled when faced with real battlefield conditions where lives depended on their abilities to perform under pressure. Sarah answered the general's questions about her background and training with the respect and professionalism she had learned during her military education. She explained how her grandfather had taught her to shoot as a child and described the patient hours spent hunting in the Kansas woods that had developed her natural abilities. She was careful to give credit to her instructors and spotter while avoiding any appearance of boasting about her personal achievements. General Morrison listened carefully to Sarah's explanations, but remained somewhat skeptical about the reports he had received regarding her shooting abilities. In his experience, truly exceptional marksmen were usually larger, more physically imposing soldiers who had served for many years in combat situations. Sarah appeared to be a polite, well-trained young woman, but hardly the extraordinary shooter described in the intelligence reports he had reviewed. The shooting demonstration began with standard military targets placed at distances ranging from 200 to 600 yards, which represented typical engagement ranges for most combat situations. Sarah fired several rounds at each distance with mechanical precision that impressed the general, but did not necessarily exceed what he had seen from other skilled marksmen throughout his career. Her performance was excellent but not remarkable, enough to explain the legendary reputation she had developed. Then General Morrison decided to test Sarah's abilities with a more challenging target. He pointed toward a distant hillside where someone had placed an empty water bottle approximately 900 yards away. At that distance, the bottle was barely visible to the naked eye and would require exceptional skill to hit even under ideal conditions. The general expected Sarah to decline the shot or miss by a significant margin, which would confirm his suspicions about exaggerated reports. Sarah studied the target through her rifle scope while making mental calculations for wind speed, air temperature, and the extreme distance involved. The shot would require compensating for bullet drop that would cause her projectile to fall several feet below the line of sight. Wind conditions were challenging, with gusts that varied in speed and direction as air currents moved through the mountain valleys surrounding the base. Without asking for assistance or additional time to prepare, Sarah positioned herself in a stable shooting stance and made the necessary adjustments to her rifle scope. She controlled her breathing and waited for the optimal moment when all conditions aligned for the most accurate shot possible. General Morrison watched through binoculars, expecting to see the bullet impact somewhere in the general vicinity of the target. If Sarah was fortunate enough to hit the hillside at all, Sarah squeezed her trigger with the same gentle pressure she had used thousands of times during training and combat operations. The bullet left her rifle at over 2,700 feet per second and began its journey across the valley toward the distant water bottle. For nearly 2 full seconds, the projectile traveled through the air while everyone present watched through optical equipment to see where it would impact. The water bottle exploded in a spray of plastic and water that was clearly visible even at 900 yards distance. The shot had struck the target dead center with precision that would have been remarkable even for an experienced marksman using the most advanced military equipment available. General Morrison stood frozen with his binoculars still raised to his eyes, staring at the impossible shot he had just witnessed. For several long moments, the general remained completely motionless as he processed what had just happened. 2 years of military service, including extensive experience with Special Operations Forces, he had never seen anything comparable to the shooting performance he had just observed. The distance, accuracy, and speed with which Sarah had made the shot exceeded anything he had previously thought possible. General Morrison slowly lowered his binoculars and looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed amazement, respect, and complete bewilderment. He realized that all the reports he had received about her abilities had actually understated rather than exaggerated her extraordinary shooting skills. The quiet young woman standing before him represented capabilities that could revolutionize military operations and save countless lives in future combat situations. The 4-star general, who had commanded armies and earned the highest military decorations, stood speechless in the presence of a small-town girl from Kansas who had just demonstrated shooting abilities that challenged everything he thought he knew about the limits of human marksmanship. Sarah Martinez had become a living legend, and General Morrison was the latest person to witness the impossible made routine through natural talent. Combined with dedicated training and unshakable courage under pressure,